Hello, and let's take a look at Algebra 1, Lesson 5.7, which is going to be on point slope form. Our objectives for today's lesson will be to graph a line and write a linear equation using the point slope form. We will also get into writing a linear equation using 2 points. During this chapter, we have been asked to identify, graph, and work with linear equations. Today's lesson, we're going to look at how to create graphs and equations given the slope and a point. We're also going to look at how we can create a linear equation when given 2 points a little bit later in this lesson. So let's take a look at our first objective or first example, using the slope and a point to make a graph. As we've talked about in class, when we have this type of information, we need to be able to display it on a graph. So our first step is going to be to plot the point. Okay, so step 1, we want to plot the point. So we're looking at 2, -2, so we're going to go over 2 and down 2. So 2, -2. So we've plotted that point. Step 2, we want to use the slope to plot additional points. So we're going to use the slope, and we're going to use that to plot additional points. So like we've done in class before, we're going to use that slope of -1. So 1 over, 1 down. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plot some additional points in the opposite direction. I go 1 over and 1 up. Now what I can do now is use that to create a line that's going to go through all these points. And that's going to be a way that we can use the slope and a point to graph. So step 1 was to plot our point that we know that we're given. Step 2 was to use the slope and basically create additional points from our original point here in red and make sure that we can then draw a line and connect the dots. The point slope form of a linear equation is in form that we are going to use throughout the rest of this book. And what it does is it takes the slope and a point and allows us to write it into an equation format. The point slope form comes from the slope formula. So if we think back to what we learned previously with the slope being y squared minus y1 over x squared minus x1, which basically lets us know the differences in y over the differences in x. And what we are going to do is transform or rearrange this so that we don't have a denominator, and that we are going to look at how does this create our point slope form. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my slope formula and I am going to get rid of the denominator, or x squared minus x1, by multiplying both sides by that. What this does is these cancel out and it leaves me with m times x squared minus x1 equals y squared minus y1. Okay, which is what we have when we rearrange this to give us our point slope form. So we get y squared minus y1 equals m times x squared minus x1, which is very similar to our point slope form. Okay, if we were to just go ahead and erase our little 2 there and our little 2 right here, we get the same thing that we see at the top here for point slope form. So this is how it's kind of related to each other, or how they are related to each other. And now we're going to talk about how we use this to take a point and take the slope and go ahead and put it into an equation format. So the directions here for writing a linear equation in point slope form is we know the slope and we know the coordinate, and we're going to go back and think about what we know here. So y minus y1 We'll write that up here again. So y minus y1, and that's going to be equal to m times x minus x1. All right, so this is exactly what we just kind of talked about. M represents our slope, x1 and y1 represents our coordinates. So these are going to be important. So what we're going to do is plug those in. So we're going to take that point slope form and we are going to identify our slope. We have our x and we have our y. And we're going to start with our y. And we're going to rewrite this as y minus 1. And that equals our slope times x minus 1/2. And our slope again was 2. So we're able to rewrite this in point slope form for each of those for each of these, the information that's given. 1/2 for x and 1 for y, 2 for the slope. So it's rewritten into a format. We're going to do the same thing over here. Our slope is 0 in this case, so the first thing I'm going to do is y minus a negative 4, and that's going to be equal to 0 times x minus 3. It's always a subtraction problem. You see y minus our y coordinate times, or equal to our slope times x minus our x coordinate. In this case we have a minus a negative 4, so this is going to change to y plus 4, 0, and x minus 3. And that would be our equation here in point slope form with the given information of a slope of 0 and a coordinate of 3, negative 4. What you should see here, and what the pattern which many students start to see, is all I'm doing is taking my slope and plugging it in where m goes, and I'm taking my x coordinate, plugging it in where the x1 is, and the y coordinate, plugging it in where the y1 is. We use this a couple different ways, and here we're going to take a linear equation. We're given the point, we're given the slope, and now we want to put it in slope-intercept form. So we're going to, first step is going to be to rewrite it in point slope form. So step 1 is to write it in point slope form. So that means y minus 1 equals 1/3 times x minus a negative 3. That's step 1. Step 2 is we're going to solve for y. If we can solve for y, then we're going to end up in slope-intercept form. So step 2 is to solve for y. So I don't have anything to change here, so this is going to be y minus 1. But now I'm going to use the distributive property. 1/3 times x minus a negative 3. I want to go ahead and rewrite this so that it's a little bit easier on myself. So minus a negative 3 is going to become x plus 3. So it makes things a little bit easier there. And now I can use my distributive property. 1/3 times x becomes 1/3 x. 1/3 times a positive 3 becomes plus 1. Now I can rewrite it. Y minus 1 equals 1/3 x plus 1. I want to get y by itself, so I'm going to add 1 to each side and rewrite it as y equals 1/3 x plus 2. And as you can see, this is in slope-intercept form because we have y equals 1/3 x, or mx, plus 2 would represent our b. So we've taken this, put it into point slope, and then taken that and put it into slope-intercept form. This is where we're going to conclude, and we're going to pick this up tomorrow in class.